QSO Today, episode 439, Fred Cady KE7X. This episode of QSO Today is sponsored by ICOM America, makers of the finest amateur radios and accessories for your ham radio station, and by Nuts and Bolts magazine. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth, amateur call sign 4Z1UG, where I demonstrate the diversity and relevance of the amateur radio hobby and its impact on society by interviewing ham radio operators, many of whom played vital roles in shaping our technology through the amateur radio hobby. And while many people might say, ham radio, do people still do that? This podcast demonstrates through in-depth interviews just how amazing, diverse, and dynamic the amateur radio hobby continues to be. Tickets are on sale now for the QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo coming next month, the weekend of March 25th. We will be on Pacific Daylight Time and actually start at 6 p.m. Friday, March 24th PDT. Our theme is New Amateur License, Now What? And while this might seem that we just want new hams, we really want every ham, new, old, and returning, looking for a new ham radio direction, or experienced hams who want to help bring others to success. Please use the link in the show notes page to get to our Expo website and registration. All of the presentations will be at the Expo or posted on the Expo website. Almost 40 riveting ham radio options for all of us. And since the participation of vendors seems slim, our focus is on our amazing presentations and socializing around new Roundtable Lounge that is part of our VFairs platform. We now have a mobile and tablet application for Apple and Android to make the Expo more portable. We need your support by buying a ticket and urging your friends to also buy a ticket and come to the Expo. It was only recently that I learned that Fred Cady KE7X became a silent key, and I thought that in Fred's memory we should recall his love of amateur radio and electronics that led him to a PhD in electronic engineering, where he found his love of teaching at Montana State University. Fred was the author of 14 books when I interviewed him in April of 2018, including many on how to operate and use Elecraft transceivers. Fred loved to operate contests and work DX. So in this episode, we go back and we remember Fred Cady, KE7Z, in this QSO Today. KE7X, this is Eric, 4Z1UG. Are you there, Fred?
4Z1UG, this is KE7X. Good morning, Eric.
Good morning, Fred. Thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
Well, it started when I was in high school, about 1958-ish, 59-ish, probably more likely. And one of my classmates got his license, and then I had a receiver. My dad had bought me an SX17, I think it was, a Elecraft's receiver that I had listened to for a year or two or so, and it just seemed like it was a good thing to try to do.
At that time, where were you growing up?
I was growing up in western New York State, south of Buffalo, New York, near Lake Erie.
Were you helped by that one ham in your high school to get your license?
Yeah, I sure did. His call at that time was K2OQO, named Pete. There were other hams in the community. W2GBK K was another one of the old timers that kind of helped us out. And as I recall, we had kind of some club organization going on, and basically got the license over that period of time.
Your first license was the novice?
It was whiskey. I guess it was Whiskey November 2, Golf Hotel November, and then changed to Whiskey Victor 2, Golf Hotel November. Or maybe it was WV2 and then changed to WA2. I forget.
Well, I think there was a period of time when novices got the WV instead of the WN.
I think that's right, yeah.
So then it became WA2.
Then it was WA2 GHN, right. Well, it was time, about a year or so after I got my license, my dad got his, so that was kind of cool, and we just kind of grew into the local local ham community, the public service area, the field day operations, all there in the early 1960s.
And did the SX-17 remain the receiver of choice, or did you upgrade once you had the novice license?
No, that stayed in the shack, and I for the receiver, and I think my first transmitter was a Globe Scout, crystal controlled.
What was your favorite operating band as a novice?
Probably 40 meters if I could find a crystal frequency that was away from the Russian broadcast stations.
Obviously, you operated CW as a novice. Once you upgraded, what was your favorite operating mode?
Well, I probably stayed on CW. I think that was what I liked most of all. I can remember some 75-meter personalities in that time frame in that part of the country on sideband, but I really never did much in the AM or sideband operation. I was more interested in CW.
Did you have an interest in contests or DXing at that point?
Probably not DXing so much, but yeah, we got pretty active and involved in VHF contesting. We had a kind of a field day site outside of town on a hilltop site, and so a couple of buddies and I were really pretty active on some of the VHF contests there in that time.
Would that be 6 and 2 meters or 2 meters and above?
Yeah, 6 and 2 meters.
Did you win any?
I think so. I don't know if I have any certificates anymore, but I think we did pretty well.
Did ham radio play a part in the choices you made for your education and career?
It did. When I graduated from high school, I wasn't able to go to college, but what I finally did, I had been a ham for, I went off to college. I had my license for 3 or 4 years or so, and so I was going to be going into engineering school and at Penn State University, and so I picked electrical engineering.
And you received a BSEE from Penn State?
I did, yes.
But then you went on in your studies, right? You didn't just hang back, or did you go into industry and work for a while before upgrading your education?
Well, I went back. My work out of high school was at General Electric in Erie, Pennsylvania, and so I went back to Erie, and I worked as an engineer in their engineering design areas, kind of getting into their stream of engineering development. During my time at college, I also got pretty wrapped up in rock climbing and mountaineering, and had an opportunity to join what was then part of ESSA. It's now part of NOAA, on an expedition or not an expedition, but a job managing some equipment at Byrd Station, Antarctica. And so I left Erie, went to Boulder, Colorado, and then spent a year in Antarctica, and then a few months in Alaska after coming back, and then I went to grad school at Caltech, California Institute of Technology in 1970-ish or so.
So you went to Caltech?
Yes, I did.
In Pasadena. How about that?
Yeah.
That's an interesting deployment. How long were you in Antarctica?
I was there just a little over a year. In the winter over party, 67, 68. We had the ESSA lab in Boulder was responsible for looking at or had experiments looking at upper atmospheric physics stuff going on and solar radiation and things like that. And so I had about 6 or 7 different experiments to take care of and gather data through the year. I did get an opportunity. Byrd Station is at 80 degrees south, and I did get an opportunity to go to Pole Station to deliver some equipment there. So I actually ended up at 90 degrees south at one time.
How many people were deployed there at Byrd Station?
At Byrd, there was 27. There was about 4 in what was known as the Long Wire Station, which is 11 miles away from the main base station. They had a big, long VLF antenna. I think it was like 10 miles long, and they were studying some very low frequency phenomena. I had a substation about a mile and a half away from the main base station. So there was all told about 27 people in the area.
And how was that for a year, to be with 27 people for a year?
I really had a pretty good duty location and living location because I could be separate if I wanted to. Some of the other fellows that lived on the main base, they were kind of cooped up and seeing the same people every day, and although they did some pretty serious psychological screening for everybody that would go down there, it was managed, of course, in those days by the Navy, and civilian contractors were running the science side of things. But it was quite good. I didn't have any personnel conflicts at all.
Did you operate ham radio from Antarctica?
Yes, I did. I was Uncle Sugar Mike, KC4 Uncle Sugar Mike. I won the CQ Worldwide Contest from Antarctica that year.
Because you were a station in demand.
That's right. I was the only one in the contest, too. So that helps to be.
Did you get extra multipliers, or people got extra multipliers by working you?
Well, I'm sure I did, but I don't remember.
Well, after that, you ended up in California, going to Caltech in Pasadena.
That's correct.
What did you study there?
I was in electrical engineering. I basically just did a master's degree there. During my time there, I ran across an opportunity to apply for a job in New Zealand, and then wife, whom I had met in Alaska, and I went off to New Zealand for 10 years, where I taught at University of Canterbury in Christchurch, and received what's called a staff PhD at that time in electrical engineering.
How was that experience?
That was great. It's really interesting to live in a foreign country, but not too foreign. We didn't have language difficulties, although a lot of expressions were different, which is kind of fun anyway. But we enjoyed our time in New Zealand a lot.
Did you come back with an accent?
Yes, we did. Yeah, my daughter did, but we lost it when we got back here. Both my wife and I kind of pick up on inflections and accents, and I think when I came up to Montana State University for a job interview, I sounded like a right old Kiwi, but I think I lost that.
And now this message from ICOM America. Got cabin fever? ICOM has the rigs that you need to get into the field or to update your ham shack with a variety of base stations, mobiles, and handhelds. ICOM's newest 2-meter amateur FM transceiver is the ICOM IC V3500 or the V3500. This 65-watt transceiver has a compact body and simple interface. Its features include simple operation with a modern white display, instant volume loud and mute functions, emergency call and alarm features, and a 4.5-watt audio amplifier for loud and crisp audio. The ICOM ICT-10 is a dual-band VHF-UHF rugged portable that meets or exceeds standard military testing in its IP67 waterproof case. The ICT-10 can withstand any field activities ahead of it. Features include extra loud 1500 milliwatt audio amplified speaker, DTMF front-mounted keypad, 5 watts of output power, 11 hours of operating time, and NOAA weather alerts. The ICOM IC7300 is our favorite high-performance innovative HF transceiver with a compact design that will far exceed every ham's expectations for an entry-level HF transceiver. This innovative HF transceiver digitizes RF before various receiver stages, reducing inherent noise in different IF stages. Features include RF direct sampling, 15 discrete bandpass filters, a large 4.3-inch color touchscreen, real-time spectrum scope, and an SD memory card slot. The IC705 is the perfect sidekick and QRP companion. Base station features and functionality at the tip of your fingers in a portable package, covering HF 6 meters, 2 meters, and 70 centimeters. This compact rig weighs in at just over 2 pounds, with RF direct sampling for most of the HF band and IF sampling for frequencies above 25 megahertz. The IC705 features include a 4.3-inch touchscreen with live band scope and waterfall display, 5 watts with a BP272 battery pack, and 10 watts when connected to 13.8 volts DC. single sideband CW, AM, FM, as well as full D-Star functions. Micro USB connector, Bluetooth and wireless LAN. Integrated GPS with antenna and GPS logger. Micro SD card slot, and a speaker microphone, the HM243, which is included in the package. The perfect accessory for the IC705 is the optional backpack, the LC192, with a special compartment for your IC705 with room for accessories and your lunch. Designed from user input, the ICOM ID5100A is mobile radio innovation taken to the next level. This rig offers an intuitive user touchscreen interface and connects with Android devices and Bluetooth headsets via the optional Bluetooth module. This mobile rig includes up to 50 watts output power, integrated GPS receiver, DV-DV dual watch, DV-FM repeater list function, D+ reflector linking, and SD card slot for voice and data storage. Finally, the ICOM ID52A is a VHF-UHF dual-band portable with D-Star and FM functionality in a beautiful handheld package. This radio supports conventional FM communications and D-Star simplex repeater regional worldwide calls over the D-Star Internet network. The ID52 features include a full-color 2.3-inch waterfall display, VV, UU, VU, and dual DV mode, integrated GPS GLONASS receiver including grid square location, micro SD card slot, micro USB for data transfer, programming, and charging, and it is IPX7 waterproof. You can share the Android app for D-Star operation, battery pack, and headsets between the ID52A and your IC705. So there you have it, the wide variety of complementary ICOM transceivers to open up the coming spring SOTA, POTA, contest, DXing, and EMS operation. You can find out more about these fine rigs by clicking on the ICOM banner in this week's show notes page. And when you visit an ICOM dealer near you to purchase one or all of these rigs, be sure to tell them that you heard about it here on QSO Today. And now back to our QSO. We have a number of listeners from New Zealand. Are New Zealand hams different than American hams?
Oh, I wouldn't say so. No, I don't think so.
Were you involved in the ham radio community there?
Yeah, we had a great club. I was working on a thesis and research and whatnot, so I wasn't able to be too active, but I did have a station and got on. And in retrospect, I wish I had taken part in more contesting activities from there. There was one of the super contesters was there at the same time that I was there, so it would have been good to follow in his footsteps a bit, but I didn't.
You know, what's interesting, I find, having lived in California and then living here in Israel, the HF sounds completely different when you're on the other side of the world in terms of what you hear mostly and who's on the air and when. But you also operated from Antarctica, so I guess you've already had some real experience living in the southern hemisphere. Yeah,
and actually that's an interesting point, because when I lived in New Zealand, I could get on, and almost invariably there was almost like a spotlight of propagation into, say, New Jersey or something like that. Guys would be pounding in. And I thought that was really interesting propagation thoughts, and probably stirred my interest in looking at propagation when we get into the contesting world.
Because you'd think from New Zealand you'd actually have a lot more Asia.
Yeah, no, the band was just open to a particular place or two in the U.S. Like I'm pretty sure it was like 20 meters and nowhere else.
And then you landed in Montana, which is where your QTH is now.
That's correct.
And you're a professor of electrical engineering at Montana State University.
Right.
And you've been there a number of years now?
Yes, we moved here in 1980. I retired from Montana State, 5 years ago, I guess now.
How are you spending your ham radio time? Well,
up until this last July, we lived at a house that had antennas, and I had a station and did a fair bit of contesting from here and another location here in Montana, and also went traveling with the Team Vertical guys.
Who is Team Vertical?
Well, Team Vertical this kind of started. K2KW is kind of the lead on and manager or of the group, and it consists of basically a number of hams have come in and gone out. We've gone to various contest locations, but N6BT Tom from Force 12, Dean and Dean Straw, N6BV has been on trips with us. Scotty W4SO, and we started off in sort of mid 90s, early 90s, going to Venezuela and then Jamaica. TV Bob, N6TV, was a big member of our contest, as is Dave Patton and N1N now, I think his call is. So there have been quite a lot of the top-notch operators that have gone with us. But Ken, K2KW, and Tom, and I guess I, to a certain extent, have been kind of the core group that have gone on most of the operations, and other people have come in and out.
It's not like renting a ship and going to the South Pacific. You actually will take the group to places that you can get to relatively easily by an airport and operate from a foreign country.
Yes, that's right. It's really kind of a field day operation. We'll take all our own antennas. The year we won CQ Worldwide Multi, I think there were 12 operators and a little over a ton of gear hand carried to Jamaica. That was when you could have two 70-pound suitcases, and boy, did we all have 70-pound suitcases.
What are the radios of choice? Does everybody have different radios that they take down, or do you have something that you like to take?
Well, in the 90s, we started off with, I guess, this is and that's, whatever we had. At some point, let's see, when we were doing worldwide from Jamaica, we were pretty keen on using MP1000s, and really found that the pile-up mush in the MP1000s was not great. Dean Straw, N6BV, who's a master, he's really was an ICOM guy, and we tried doing some things with modifying the night before the contest. My MP took it apart and started adding capacitors here and there and in other places. I didn't think I was going to get my radio back in time to have the contest. But then we discovered the Elecraft line, and with the Elecraft K2s came out, and the performance of those radios was far and away better than what we could get out of the big boxes, and so we adopted the K2, and I forget the year, and we started doing single op operations. And so one year we had, I think, 5 or 6 world single op band QRP records. And then the 100-watt amp came along for the K2, so we went back to Jamaica and set 5 or 6 world 100-watt records, including 160, from two-point land, which is pretty good in worldwide contests. And then we migrated to the K3 as the K3 came about.
With the new portable radios like the KX3 and the KX2, are those contest-worthy radios to take on these trips?
I've not done those. I haven't been on a trip with Ken and the lads for a while now, but I don't think personally I would. I would stay with the larger radio, the K3.
It's relatively light.
Yeah.
Now, you guys call yourself Team Vertical. Why is that? Where's the vertical come from?
Well, our real claim to fame is the use of verticals on the beach or right in the water, and that came about because of the work that N6BT was doing with verticals, and so Ken, K2KW, and Dean and Tom set up a kind of an experiment with verticals right at the edge of the water. Moving back from the water, we understand about low angle propagation and enhancement due to near field salt water. It's got to be salt water. It can't be fresh water. And so all our contest records and all the operations we've had, well, I guess basically since going to Jamaica or going to Venezuela in the sort of mid 90s is based on vertical antennas right on the edge of the beach, and having phenomenal signals all around the world with the verticals. We would use directive arrays, 2-element arrays and 4-element arrays, but all verticals.
You're using aluminum tubing for these vertical antennas so that the salt water doesn't seem to have as harsh an effect on them?
Yeah, and of course we're not there for very long. The verticals that Tom would build all would collapse down. We'd be able to handle a multi-operate station with about 3 Gulf carriers of antennas of aluminum. Some places we would put up an inverted L wire for 160, and then lately we've just been taking an aluminum setup for 160.
It seems to me that the salt water would be pretty hard on like feed line and antennas, antenna junctions and stuff. And even though they're not in the water for very long, are you able to reuse like feed lines from event to event? And do you have some process to making sure that it doesn't get eaten up in your suitcase as it's headed back to America?
Yeah, we would often leave a coax behind us and then use it the next year. We would always tape all coax joints and everything, and so and they weren't in the water per se. Sometimes you might get some wave action, but usually we would be on the edge of the water on the beach or the iron shore. The antennas would get saltwater spray these were telescoping antennas that were riveted together following the Force 12 construction technique, and we would use WD-40 when we inserted the elements together, which would kind of displace water elements, rivet them up, and then maybe when we would go home, we would throw them in the pool at the condo we were staying at to kind of wash them off a bit, throw them back in the Gulf carrier, take them home, and Tom probably cleaned them up after that or something like that. But yeah, the antennas would travel back and forth for a number of operations, and although each time we seem to have a new version of antennas, we're there a week before the contest and then the contest. So, we're there 10 days basically would be the most time that we would have that stuff out there. One thing we did learn at one time was kind of amusing. This is, we use the verticals are all elevated verticals. It just doesn't work to throw a wire from into the ocean. That's not a good grounding scheme or radial scheme. So we used elevated radios, and at one time, and we'd pick up sticks of driftwood and kind of elevate things with that. And one time we had at the end of a radio kind of wrapped around a piece of driftwood, I guess, without using an insulator, caught the driftwood on fire. So there's some voltages at the end of a quarter wave vertical radio. But we learned things to keep stuff light. We wouldn't take porcelain egg insulators. We would use wire wraps or wire ties as insulators. Perfectly fine insulation, insulator for a temporary antenna location.
I want to take a minute to tell you about my favorite podcast, the Ham Radio Workbench Podcast, with George, KJ6VU, and now joined by Rod, VA3ON, Mike, VA3MW, Mark, N6MTS, and Vince, VE6LK. Every 2 weeks, George and company offer up a status report on the many amateur radio projects on their workbenches and explore projects on their guests' workbenches. This group is project active and prolific, covering many technical areas of amateur radio. So the next time you want a deep dive into ham radio electronic project building, or to learn about technology, tools, test equipment, construction techniques, and the rest, listen to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast, available on every podcast player and channel. Use the link in this week's show notes page to get to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast directly. And now back to my QSO. So you've mastered the art of packing and getting everything you need down to location, even with the new luggage constraints of the airlines.
Yeah, it's tougher these days, for sure.
But the equipment's lighter these days.
Yeah.
You were honored by the ARRL in 1988 for your commitment to teaching newcomers to amateur radio. A lot of time has passed, 30 years has passed since then. Have you changed your approach to teaching new hams today?
You know, I'm not involved in the classes so much. One of the other fellows in the physics department here is doing some of that. After that time, I guess I can't really remember how things kind of slowed, but they slowed down. And in terms of how I teach things today, I bring my teaching skills, I think, to the books that I've been writing. One of the things that I think, in my professorial life, I learned was that people have different ways of learning. It was a big epiphany for me, and as I changed my teaching techniques in the classroom, I also changed or could apply that also to teaching some of the ham radio. So the ham radio books I've written about the Elecraft radio apply a lot of that I learned while teaching in the classroom.
For me, it was an epiphany to see what's happened in ham radio. I took a 25-year hiatus from ham radio where I wasn't active in a club and I wasn't reading the magazines. It was really like Rip Van Winkle waking up and seeing, what's happened. Do you think that hams are different or ham candidates are different now than they were? There's certainly a lot more stuff competing for their attention.
I think so, although it sounds like there are more licensed hams in the U.S. than there ever has been for whatever reason. One of the fellows from the club the other day at our morning coffee session was kind of bemoaning the fact that these people in the classes really have no skills at all. It's really, really hard. And earlier on, we were talking about the Elmering situation, and I think that's a difficulty. This, the other things that we can do take us away from some of the things that we've done in the past, and so there may not be the opportunity for new people coming along to tie in with an older ham. On the other hand, our local club has a branch that operates in the local schools, getting sort of the middle school kids involved. They like it until they discover the opposite sex, I guess, and then there's a fair bit of operating activity, public service activity. And so, in that sense, that's kind of like the same. I think the same opportunities are here than they were, 40, 50 years ago when we were young, but there's still a lot more of things to do. So, I don't know. I think that the people that are coming in to the hobby today are the ones who have had this hiatus, and maybe they had a license before and went off to college and careers and families, or they had a gruff great uncle down the block who had his radio when he was a kid, and they want to recover some of that. But it's hard. I don't think the people are any different. I just think they're a lot more busy and a lot of things that they have to do. My friend VE3YT Vic in Ontario is kind of a mentor for the college age student club at the University of Waterloo, and he says they kind of want to put up a off-center fed dipole and take care of everything, and not sort of understand about, well, geez, a dipole may be better than an off-center fed. They kind of are almost wanting to have a instant gratification.
One size fits all.
Yeah.
They want to work 160 to 450 because some of the radios come that way, right? Configured on one antenna.
Yeah.
I think that's where the Elmering comes in terms of where you actually need somebody to provide a guiding hand.
Right.
You've written 14 books, I think, on Elecraft radios. They have great reviews. I've actually have been moving around the various social media and ham radio sites looking at the reviews of these radios. You might be the most knowledgeable guy outside of Elecraft on their radios. Why Elecraft radios and not other brands that seem to be equally or more complex?
The approach I take is that I want to learn how the radio works. I started off with me not understanding how the sub-receiver antenna switching was going on based on the owner's manual. And so I said, and so I like figuring stuff out. And I also like, I mentioned earlier on, there are various ways people learn. I think I'm a visual learner. I think a lot of people are visual learners. They like to see things. Other people read things. Other people learn by doing things. And so I decided, well, if I'm having trouble understanding this, I'm not dumb. And so maybe other people could use some help in understanding this the way I understand it. So my first books into it, I wanted to call it the Hitchhiker's Guide to the K3, but Wayne Burdick didn't like that very well. It didn't sound professional, and I thought, well, Hitchhiker's Guide, that's kind of a fun. But in any event, one thing led to another. I apply, like I say, the things I learned while I was in the classroom to the text. The really textbook forms of an operational manual. Here's how this works. Here's a little exercise that you can use. David Shove calls them lab exercises, homework assignments, that kind of a thing. And so by presenting images in terms of diagrams, text in terms of explanation, and things that you can sit down at your radio and do to cement the learning, I think that's been really why the books I've written have been successful.
These radios are complex, not just the Elecraft, but I think all of them, all the new ones are complex because you have a lot of features that you're trying to control with the limited number of buttons on the front panel. So literally, you actually will dissect a control or a feature in the radio and break it down so that by the time that your student who's reading your book is done with the chapter and done the exercises, then he pretty much knows how to control the radio.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And so there you ask about why not other radios? Well, that's a lot of work, and I just didn't have the other radios to work with. I'd love to kind of learn more about other radios, but I don't have them. So you can't do this just from the owner's manual. You have to have the thing in front of you. At least I do, and I have to say, all right, what does this button do if I push it? And oh, that's what it does. And here's why it does that. And da da da. So it's got to be I may be a visual learner, but I'm also a hands-on learner too.
I think that's a great idea. Actually, I hope that people listening will say, well, if Fred's not going to write the book, all the other brands, competitive radios out there, that there's an opportunity for someone else to do the same thing, hopefully, and make some of these radios a little bit more accessible Have you thought about doing any videos, YouTube videos or anything like that?
At one time I tried doing that for a semiconductor company that I was working with, and in developing some of their online learning, and that's not my forte at all. I'd kind of like to. I've got a new project in hand with VE3Y2 is called Authoring, and this is kind of more of a radio agnostic a book about how to be successful as a ham radio operator, and the thesis being, well, you can turn your radio on and push the noise blanker, and it does something. But if you understood what the noise blanker did and why it works in some places and why it works not, you're going to be more successful at using that particular feature of a radio, whether it's a Kenwood, ICOM, Yaesu, whatever. And so that's kind of the new thing I'm working on. I kind of forget where I was headed with this, but again, I guess that's applying.
So it's kind of a dummy's guide to HF.
Well, in a sense, I think it fits between the Ham Radio for Dummies, Ward Silver's book, and ARRL Operator's Manual and handbooks. It'll we'll kind of give say you're a returning ham after many years away, and I kind of like to get into DXing. What's the path I should follow in order to get into DXing? Or I want to learn something about. I just want to do VHF public service. Or what's the path that you follow to learn so that you can be successful at that, whatever your goal is, collecting DXCC or whatever the goal happens to be.
We see from both DX University and Contest University, at Dayton, with increasing numbers of attendees every year, that this kind of learning is actually needed in ham radio in terms of giving people an opportunity to listen to people who have a lot of experience in person, perhaps, or maybe at some point we'll even see more of it on YouTube or on live webinars, but giving people an opportunity to actually learn from the experts on how to be successful. And I think that's what we all need. We all need a little success at first, I think, to make us feel like we can do it and do more of it.
Yeah. I kind of start this off by saying, having a conversation with somebody that says, I can talk to anybody around the world on my cell phone. Why in the world would I want to do ham radio? And I kind of say, and then my response is, well, what about challenge? Challenge is something that gives us satisfaction when we meet the challenge. Here's some really interesting challenges in ham radio. DXing, all the different award programs you can do, QRP operating, antenna design. There's all these facets of ham radio that are not just talking to somebody around the world, and can be a challenge for somebody. I think people need and they like challenges, and you feel good. It's a challenge to get a license in the first place. Didn't you feel pretty good about that? Oh yeah, I did. So here's where you can go to get more challenges.
My response is usually it takes $1 trillion worth of infrastructure in order to make that phone call around the world. And with a $50 QRP rig, you can throw a piece of wire out your bedroom window and talk around the world without $1 trillion worth of infrastructure.
Yep, no, that's right.
We will return to our guests in just a moment. Nuts and Bolts Magazine is a new sponsor and is an amazing resource for new and old hams alike. Click on the banner to get your online or paper subscription of Nuts and Bolts. A new way to show your support of the QSO Today podcast is to buy me a coffee. I consume gallons of coffee to create this weekly podcast. Invite me for coffee by pushing the yellow button, Buy Me a Coffee, on the QSO Today show notes page. And now back to our QSO Today. When I think of Montana, I think of the Robert Redford movie, A River Runs Through It. Are you a fly fisherman?
Oh, I've dabbled a fly in the water a little bit time and again, but not. I wouldn't say I was really avid about it. But yeah, it's a great sport here in this part of Montana.
Does it mix with ham radio? Are you taking your radios out into the field?
No, probably not. If I would go fishing, I would throw the fly rod in the car and go out onto the river and fish. It's probably, I have a mobile in the car, but it's not. That I don't think they meld together.
Well, I guess if you've got a 6-meter rod, you could probably put a wire out on the end and put the KX2 on your chest while you're getting those flies out there.
Yeah, there was a great picture about somebody sitting on some rock somewhere or other doing just that.
Do you do a lot of fly fishing or just a little bit?
No, just a little bit. I haven't really been very active for a few years.
There's just something about the whole notion. It's kind of a romantic notion that runs through the back of my brain of standing in the river and fly fishing in Montana. We don't have any rivers here that have any fish in them. I guess I'm going to have to come to Montana to be able to do that.
Yeah, you're going to have to do that. That'd be you'd enjoy it.
What kind of impact has amateur radio had on your family life?
Not so much. My daughter got her license. We actually required her to get her ham license before she got her driver's license. This is back before cell phones, and so she could call in when she had trouble or anything like that. My wife got her license, but not active particularly, and both of them have gravitated away from ham radio. My daughter still has her license, but my wife's has elapsed. But they've been supportive of me going off on trips and having my cubby hole down in the basement to go down and operate contests and do my thing. So there really hasn't been a conflict in the family life.
Do the spouses, they don't go on Team Vertical?
They did in some of them, but we're pretty focused and weren't paying much attention to them, and so they said, well, we'll just stay home.
What excites you the most about what's happening in ham radio now?
I get excited about learning new things. The whole digital repeater world is, I'm having taught microprocessors and all that sort of stuff. I'm kind of okay on the computer side of things, but the interconnectivity world is something I want to learn some more about. So the whole digital repeater, the DMR radio things sounds fascinating. I'm interested in looking at that. I'm not big on communicating over it, but I'd like to understand more about how it works and how to make use of it. I guess that goes back to my my whole learning. I really like to learn stuff, so that's where I am, and now I'm in a condo where I'm not allowed any antennas, and so I'm sort of getting into the remote radio world. I'll probably set up a remote radio station here not far away from where I now live. I'm using one of my friend's radios remotely, which has been fun. And the new digital mode's been interesting. And so, there's still a lot to be excited about in ham radio, even after 60 years or whatever it is.
Yeah, it seems to me that you can drop one thing and then something else pops up that's quite interesting. We're having a DMR renaissance here in Israel. I'm kind of excited that we're having a renaissance at all with ham radio here, and DMR seems to be the thing that's supercharging it. Yeah.
Well, I think that the Weak Signal Joe Taylor crowd, WSJT, FT8, is probably also generating a lot of things. I've been doing that for the last couple of weeks, and gosh, there's a lot of really good DX on doing that kind of thing that it would be hard to hear and work in other times. So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. What advice would you give to newer returning hams to the hobby?
I guess don't be afraid to ask questions. Join a club. Get a computer. You really having the computer in your station enhances almost every aspect. You say, well, gosh, I'd like to talk. I'd like to talk to Israel today. Well, what band is open? Well, you go find that on the internet. You could do these other modes of operating. So I think joining clubs and getting a computer and looking for my new successful ham radio book when it comes out.
And the 14 others that you've already written on.
Well, yeah, that's a specific audience. I'd like to touch a lot more, help a lot more folks.
Today I read a white paper that you wrote on the N1MM contest logging software. You made a reference to, and I couldn't find it, and maybe it's in the software, of a contests CW simulator. Was that in the N1MM software?
I haven't followed up on that. I think there's a way to tie, the contest simulators that are really have been helpful to me is Morse Runner, and I think there is a interface that. And Morse Runner looks like this WPX contest. And there's also another CW contest or call sign copying program. But I'm pretty sure there's some hooks between Morse Runner and maybe some other simulator and N1MM. And I haven't followed up on that to know where that exists. But if somebody wants to be keyboard proficient at N1MM, and no doubt the other programs as well, Morse Runner is the program that I like to use. It's a pile up simulator. You can do all kinds of stuff with it.
So you can actually sit there and maybe start at a slower speed, but work your way up to be able to copy code like you're sitting in the middle of a contest.
Yeah, and you can add in pileups. You can add in noise. You can, there's lots of great stuff.
Without the embarrassment of throwing yourself out there on a contest weekend.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, Fred, I want to appreciate your coming on the QSO Today podcast. Can I ask you, how would people be in touch with you if they'd like to send you a message? One of the things they can do is they can actually leave a message at the bottom of your show notes page, and I'll forward the message to you to make sure that you see it if they have a question. But what channels are you on that they could reach you?
Yeah, I think probably the best would be an email to fcady@ke7x.com. That's fcady@ke7x.com. My website is www.ke7x.com. So, yeah, any of those ways to go.
Right, and there's all kinds of stuff on your website. I actually went through it, so I'll put links to both of those in the show notes page so that if they want to reach out, they can. Again, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. It was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot that I didn't know before, and that's always one of the great things about each of these episodes is I'm learning more about ham radio every day. 73.
All right, thanks so much, Eric. Take care.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Fred. Keep in mind that a transcript has already been made of this QSO Today, so just push the button if you want to read it. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in KE7X in the search box at the top of the page. It will return several options, including the transcript and 2 QSO Today episodes. My thanks to ICOM America for their continued support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support of this fine sponsor by clicking on their link in the show notes pages. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any of the other episodes into written text, click on the transcribe button at the top of the show notes page. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes page. By using the Amazon link on the home page before you shop at Amazon allows Amazon to send us a small commission on what you purchase that further keeps our QSO Today project going. I am grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference as we work towards episode 500. QSO Today is now available on a large number of podcast players and now a host of podcast services and applications. We are Podcast 2.0 compatible. I now use the Fountain podcast player to listen to all of my favorite podcasts. Until next time, this is Eric for Z1UG 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.